Welcome back. A new report from the CDC this week shows that firearm-related deaths are the #1 cause of death in children and adolescents in our country. This shows that gun-related injuries have overtaken like car crashes.
Look at their faces, say their names. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. Guns are now the leading cause of death among children in America.
In 2020, guns were the leading cause of death for children in the United States.
Research from the University of Michigan, it's brand new, and it finds gun violence is now the leading cause of death among children and teenagers.
Yeah, that's right. It replaces motor vehicle crashes. You know, you hear those numbers and those statistics, and you really have to sit with it. Guns kill more kids than car crashes, as you mentioned.
From 2019 to 2020, firearm-related deaths among children increased by 29%, making guns the leading cause of death for young people.
Gun violence is 100% preventable.
Disturbing new details tonight about the dangerous combination of guns and children. Research in the New England Journal of Medicine shows the #1 cause of death for children, surpassing car crashes.
Between 2019 and 2020, more than 4,300 children died because of guns in the United States, according to CDC mortality data.
You might be wondering, how big of an issue are guns among kids?
And you will be seeing tweets like these claiming that firearms are the leading cause of death among American kids and teenagers. Motor vehicle accidents had been the leading cause of death. Guns are the new leading cause of death for kids and teenagers.
More sad news, very troubling this morning. New data show guns were the leading cause of death in children and teenagers in 2020. More than 4,300 kids under the age of 20. Further evidence that gun violence increased during the COVID pandemic.
Gun violence has been on the minds of many.
You know, thoughts and prayers, they will not fix it, but strong laws will. Signing into law a sweeping 10-bill package. The governor now looking to Washington to follow suit, calling on Congress to pass tighter laws nationwide.
Gun violence is a disease that is tearing our nation apart, and it is now the #1 killer of children in America.
We have to send a message. We are taking basic common sense steps to protect our residents.
And it is now the #1 killer of children in America.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 And I don't want prayers. I don't want thoughts. I want gun control, and I hope to God nobody else sends me any more prayers. I want gun control. No more guns. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live, number 182. Totalitolerance. What is a woman in the new woke order? the new NWO, the new woke order. What does it mean to be a woman today? Ladies out there, are you aware that there are women speaking on your behalf today, claiming to know what's best for you? Well, today we're going to take a look at that and many other things that have to do with this culture that we're living in. First of all, as you can see in this little montage we put together for you, fear of death enslaves the world. Now, we are charged to not worry. We're comforted. Psalm 81, verse 11, but my people didn't listen to my voice and did not obey, so I gave them over to the stubbornness of their heart to walk in their own devices. Which reminds us also of Romans chapter 1. The history of the world is the judgment of the world. God has allowed all the nations to go their own way. Acts 14, this is nothing new. Verse 13 there in Psalm 81, God says, "Oh, that my people would listen to me, that they would walk in my ways. I would quickly subdue their enemies and turn my hand against their adversaries." And those who hate the Lord would pretend obedience to him. In other words, it would be so good to be under the protection of the Lord that people would even pretend to be believers. Verse 16, "And I would feed you with the finest wheat, and with honey from the rock I would satisfy you." True satisfaction, if people would follow their Creator. So you saw in there lots of things. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. First of all, let's do a little narrative busting right off the bat. If you'll notice, that wasn't in these clips, but you've probably heard this, that they're trying to get laws passed right now to make it so that if someone gets shot, that the gun manufacturer can be sued, held liable, and be taken to court. However, vaccine manufacturers cannot be sued for damages if their product harms someone. So there we see one of the bold contradictions, all coming from basically the same movement out there. You also heard about thoughts and prayers. I had some other clips for you, but they didn't make it into the intro tonight. But it's just clips of people saying they don't want any more thoughts and prayers. You saw the lady there at the end, and in a couple of the news reports, thoughts and prayers are not enough. We don't need any more thoughts and prayers. There's Cory Booker, when he was making his run for presidency. Listen to this.
We respond. When 4 children died in a bombing in Birmingham,
He's talking about gun violence, and this is back when he was running for president, and he's gonna take it back. He's gonna take it back to the civil rights. He's gonna make it a civil rights issue. He's going way back into history and picking events that have an emotional value in people's minds to couple them with his movement today. It's not the same movement at all. But if you'll notice, you can't see her, but the lady on the she's out of the shot. Let's get her in the shot here. There's a lady sitting in the corner of the screen. There she is. There you go. She's very approving.
Rose up, black and white, diverse nation, rose up and said that is wrong, and we changed laws. Some of you know your history, remember the shirtwaist factory fire in New York. Yes, everybody's saying yes. When women were throwing themselves out windows. To my friend that's a union organizer, you know union history.
All right, I'm going to move it forward a little bit here because there's a statement here I want you to hear.
Nothing. They're killed in a church in South Carolina, and we do nothing. They kill our children in their schools, at their desks, and we do nothing. And on my block, 2 boys shot about a week ago in my neighborhood. On my block, where Shahad Smith was killed with an assault rifle, where I live, where children on the 4th of July, when they hear fireworks going off, hide under beds and hide in closets because they're still traumatized.
Now, this violence is awful, folks. Let's make no mistake about that. Let's just, so everyone understands here, there's no mockery here. But there's a little mockery coming back from that. What children were hiding under their beds? Right? This is some very language that's intended to make you feel emotional. It's a serious issue. There's no question about that. But let's deal with that. I'm gonna have to be careful with what I say here because of the platform. But is gun violence? Is it really the leading cause of death for children in America? We're going to look at that. We're going to debunk that here in just a minute. But listen to Cory Booker.
By the everyday violence going on in America. This is unacceptable. And yeah, I said it, thoughts and prayers are not enough because I was raised in a church where my mom taught Sunday school.
There you go. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. He's going to quote some James here.
That faith without works is dead. I am going to run for your president. I am determined to get there. And if I am your president, I am going to bring a fight to the corporate gun.
Thoughts and prayers are not enough, and faith without works is dead. But prayers are not enough. Here he is again in his bid for president.
I think I'm the only one. I hope I'm the only one on this panel here that had 7 people shot in their neighborhood just last week. Someone I knew, Shahad Smith, was killed with an assault rifle at the top of my block last year. For millions of Americans, this is not a policy issue. This is an urgency. And for those who have not been directly affected, they're tired of living in a country where their kids go to school to learn about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and how to deal with an active shooter in
It's a powerful line, no doubt about that.
their school. This is something that I'm tired of, and I'm tired of hearing people, all they have to offer is thoughts and prayers. In my faith, people say...
Gets a round of applause. We don't need prayers. Don't need that stuff, right? We need real action. We need the government to do something. God had his chance. Is that what they're saying?
Faith without works is dead. So we will find a way.
There it is again. Faith without works is dead. Interesting. Check this out.
The reason we have a problem.
I didn't have this pulled up, but do I have Don Lemon here? Surely I do. I do. Bear with me. Because you're going to hear this same rhetoric here. There he is. There's Don.
Please pay attention if you're doing something or whatever. I really want your attention this evening and with an open mind. How many more times are we going to have to do this?
Well, this is a few years old,
people
but
we don't know,
want to make the
meet
point.
under the most horrific circumstances, their loved ones live, snuffed out in an instant for no good reason. How many times are we going to look up at the TV and see and hear people grieving, sobbing their hearts out in front of the world, for the whole world to see? And before we even know the full story,
Now he goes, I don't want to play this whole thing, it's 3 minutes long, but the same message, thoughts and prayers, they're not enough. Now he does give a defense that we should be praying. His faith background is interesting. Baptist boy who went to Catholic school, and I'm not making any judgment about him. I'm just saying that this is interesting, that the narrative. Remember what we like to do here. What we're always trying to do is we're trying to make sense of the narrative they're feeding us. So he goes on to say thoughts and prayers are not enough. And then at the end he says this.
substance and action this time that precludes another thoughts and prayers moment. Remember this, faith without works is dead.
I don't know. Does that feel weird to you? Right? These two guys, faith without works is dead. Well, we're not going to break down that today, but what of that? Right? What about what do they mean by faith? What do they mean by by works? I assume what they mean is that you got to do something, right? if you say you're of the faith, if you say you're someone with faith, if you say you're a Christian or Catholic or whatever, maybe a Muslim, your prayers are not enough. You need to act. Prayers don't do anything. That's the general sentiment of our world, of our nation. Let's just focus on this nation for right now. But just wanted to share a couple of those moments with you because it's interesting what's happening out there. Let's play a couple. Let's just play the intro to this little clip here because I want to talk about this new research.
Welcome back. A new report from the CDC this week shows that firearm-related deaths are the #1 cause of death in children and adolescents in our country. This shows that gun-related injuries have overtaken like car crashes.
Look at their faces, say their names. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. Guns are now the leading cause of death among children in America.
In 2020, guns were the leading cause of death for children in the United States.
Research from the University of Michigan, it's brand new, and it finds gun violence is now the leading cause of death among children and teenagers.
Yeah, that's right. It replaces motor vehicle crashes.
So that seems to be the script that everyone received. They didn't all get the same memo, it looks like, on where the research came from, because we heard 3 different places that the research came from. Well, of course, that's possible, but it's very interesting. And you also heard that it passing automobile accidents, leading cause of death. And then the reason I wanted to explain, for those of you who may not know, there's a media group called Sinclair. Deadspin put this video out, this montage video out a few years ago. That was at you saw it there, right? This piece here where, not that, but I'm asking the question, should we trust it? And then I followed it up with this little thing here where all of these news sources around the nation are caught reading the same script.
The same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of bots.
And this one was about misinformation or disinformation or whatever. It was about people doing research and coming to their own conclusions and how that's very dangerous for our democracy. Sinclair Group, I think, is the group that Deadspin had mentioned was, is typically, has been before, behind these types of public press releases and getting the news, all the local news outlets to say exactly the same thing for a reason.
Biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish things that aren't true without checking.
Democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
So all this happened within days. All these outlets reading the same script, coming down from a PR firm. If you're with us over the last couple of videos, we've been talking about this. In 2016, the government, United States government, spent $1 billion on public relations. Now, about 60% of that went to military public relations. But $1 billion was spent on shaping your mind because their #1 tool, we'll just be nice and call it a tool. Their #1 tool or weapon is the mainstream media. That's what's used to shape public opinion. All right? So, thanks for bearing with me on that. Let me just ask you, what do you think is the leading cause of death for children in the United States of America? I'll go you one better. How about in all the world? Sorry about that, folks. What do you think it is? Any idea? All right, suspense is over. Let's get to it. So we get the news that the leading cause of death for children in the United States as of 2020, for the year ending, was gun-related deaths at 4,300. And look, that's horrible. Our nation is no shining example of any type of righteousness right now. This is a terrible statistic. I don't have any reason to doubt the number, other than perhaps they're not reporting this information exactly truthfully. I'm just saying that because of what we've just witnessed. And the way these numbers, we're months, just a few months away from midterm elections. These stories are going to be coming at you fast and furious for a while. So just want to give that disclaimer. Any death, before of a child, is tragic to be cut down before your time, way before your time. But the world is enslaved by the fear of death. So let's look at this. 4,300 gun-related deaths in the year 2020. What about this? What about abortion? How many do you think in the United States of America alone in 2020? There you go. There you go. Now we're getting outrage for this one. And it's deserved. This is no good. Even if that number was, even if the right number was half of that. The term gun related, what does that actually mean? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Like doublespeak. And in our next show, our next Armor of Truth Live show, we're going to look at doublespeak. Like gun related. What does that what did they mean by that? We don't really have a definition of that, but we could be just anything. But this, we don't hear a word from the media about this. There is no outrage, no lockdowns. Now we have recently, by God's grace. We're hearing reports of Supreme Court perhaps going to reverse Roe v. Wade, all that. Wouldn't really do much of anything to any law at the moment, or it wouldn't make that big a difference there. But what it would do is expose lots of people who have been hiding under that federal ban for a long time, saying they're pro-life. So a lot of governors and politicians would be exposed once they had to decide, well, is our state really going to ban it or not? So 886,677 human beings killed, destroyed in the year 2020. And no one seems to get all that bent out of shape about it. In fact, that's healthcare. That's healthcare. It's your right. Let's look at this. So worldwide, 42.6 million. 42.6 million abortions worldwide in the year 2020. Since 2020, there have been 1.8 million COVID deaths. And what does that mean? Who really knows what that even means? For the first year of that thing, people were just anybody. Motorcycle accidents were COVID deaths. So there you go. That, my friends, that is a true pandemic. That is a real problem. Not saying that this gun-related is not a real problem. I'm just saying this has been sitting like this for a long time, right? So what we know is both of these are very politically motivated, politically sensitive topics. So let's look at some more information on this, just so we can understand what's real. If we look at this on the Wayback Machine, this is for 2020. It's still, let's see, it's going to retrieve the data. So this is the Wayback Machine 4 on Worldometer. For this one is actually December 24th. Yeah, this is December 24th, 2020. That's as close as I could get to the last day of the year. And we'll see if it actually gets to retrieve it. But you'll see the number. You'll see that. Let's jump ahead over here because it's having a hard time getting that date up for us. We can jump here and show you right now in real time today. I was trying to get you to look at the real-time number as of December 24th, 2020. But here you go. Oops. As it stands right now, get a full screen for you here. Already in this year, we're halfway through the year. That's worldwide, of course. 18.5 million. Those are deaths. They're not counted as deaths, though. They're not counted as deaths. It's healthcare. So just to keep it all in perspective as we move off of this now and get into our what is a woman in the new woke order. Is it true that gun violence is the leading cause of death for children in the U.S.? I know people would accuse me of playing with definitions there, but I don't. Okay, so what? This is happening every year. Since 1973, there have been more than 62 million abortions in the United States. As you saw there, 42.6 million conducted in 2020, surpassing the world's leading causes of death. Over 42 million abortions occurred in 2020, far surpassing the totals of people who perished as a result of the world's other leading causes of death. According to Worldometer, a reference website that monitors statistics on deaths in real time, over 40 million abortions are performed worldwide annually. And in 2020 alone, more than 42.6 million. According to Johns Hopkins University, raise an eyebrow on those, more than 1.8 million people worldwide died of coronavirus in 2020. Other leading causes of death in 2020 were, the other leading causes were nearly 1.4 million. Suicides are responsible for nearly 1.1 million deaths every year in the world. The total number of deaths in the world, for example, in the year 2020, was nearly 59 million. That's the official count on deaths. But if abortions were counted as a cause of death, rather than just another health statistic, the global death toll in 2020 would increase to more than 100 million. That's a real emergency. That is depopulation. And for young women that have been through this, just understand, you're living in a fallen world. You've been taken, your mind has been seduced by this world, and there are many who have dealt with this. The number of pregnancies terminated worldwide in 2020 is greater than the total number of people that succumbed to all other leading causes of death that were listed. Abortion is the leading cause of death worldwide. It is also the leading cause of death in the United States. According to the same statistics that they used to give us this story about gun violence, now is the new leading cause of death at 4,300. According to the pro-abortion Guttmacher Institute, 862,320 abortions were performed in the United States in 2017. The total number of deaths in the United States, excluding abortions, was 2.8 million. Just a few more of these to keep it in perspective. As of the year 2019, here are some stats to give you a good foundation for what is the leading cause of death in the world? How's it happening? Unmarried women account for 86%. This is in the United States. 86% of all abortions. Pregnancies that ended in abortion. Married women, 4%. Unmarried women, 28%. Women in their 20s had the majority of abortions and the highest abortion rates. White women, 10% of pregnancies ended in abortion. And here's a topic we've covered on this channel before. Black women, almost 30% of pregnancies for black women ended in abortion. Now that is because Planned Parenthood focuses on in certain areas of the nation and has been for years. Eugenics, you can't get around it. It's a eugenics operation. The rate for women living in metropolitan areas, they get twice as many abortions as women living outside of the city. What's that about? Career, maybe? 95% of abortions occur in independent clinics with no established doctor-patient relationship. In other words, this is walk-in abortion on demand, about 95%. 40% of the minors who had an abortion in 2019 reported that neither parent knew about it. Now let's look back at 2014. Some stats. One thing about abortion statistics that you get, the CDC's numbers, they will not include California and New York, I think it is. There's a lot of abortions there that are not counted. So you have to go to other sources. So abortions that were paid for with public funds, California, 88,466. In New York, it was 45,000 abortions paid for with tax dollars. A little interesting statistic here, religious affiliation, 30% of those receiving an abortion identified as Protestant. 24% identified as Catholic. Now, some would say in the abortion debate, well, you know, there are reasons, there are causes here, and certainly there are allowances in laws in states where abortion is banned. There are reasonable allowances for health and other things that might be extenuating circumstances, but it is less than 0.5% abortions occur from a victim of rape. 7% are medical, meaning that the baby or the mother is at risk. 86% of all abortions are social economic. In other words, it's for convenience. And 6% is other. So I appreciate you indulging me on that, because I thought, look, we've got this new narrative out there about gun violence, and this is a good time to bring everybody back to what is actually leading.
And you really have to sit with it. Guns kill more kids than car crashes, as you mentioned.
Than car crashes. Okay. What is a woman? I'm waiting. You got an answer? Does anybody know anymore? How is language being manipulated to corrupt society? Is gun violence now actually the leading cause of death for children in America? What is the way forward for Americans who can see this depravity driving our country toward a mind-controlled surveillance police state where war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength? George Orwell, who knew a thing or two about how to corrupt a culture, said the great enemy of clear language is insincerity. We've been seeing that a lot here lately since with this Johnny Depp trial. And you know, as a Christian, you would be like, well, why would we pay any attention to that? And yeah, it's salacious, and it's you could spend your time doing a lot of better things. But we're going to use this narrative tonight to help us understand what's going on in our culture, who's behind it. Gun violence, they say, is now the leading cause of death for children in the USA. Should we trust that story? We've just seen the Mockingbird mainstream media circulating this script in the same way that we've seen before. Local news and national news all reading from the same Sinclair propaganda factory script. What is the number one cause of death for children in the United States? Now you know. But the mainstream media is bolstering and proclaiming other narratives. Particularly now, Amber Heard is the new face of strong women victimized by patriarchy. Amber Heard's lawyer, Elaine Bredehoft, is proclaiming the culture-corrupting narrative of personal autonomy as absolute authority. Or, my truth is the only true truth. Now, if you've been seeing any of this, especially the interviews, a lot of people saw the interviews with Elaine there, Amber's lead attorney. You might have heard her say, this is Amber's truth. It's Amber's truth. That and $6 will get you a cappuccino at Starbucks. That's not worth anything. Her truth, it doesn't matter what her truth is. What is the truth? But that's what she's out there doing. They're telling us that we should always trust the claims of a person, trust or distrust a person's claims based on their sex. If it's a woman, you always trust her. If it's a man, you never trust him, is implied. Jada Pinkett Smith, wife of Will Slapgate Smith, who is sadly a confused woman with a very large public profile, who boldly professes open marriage and encourages her own children toward homosexuality, is being held up also as an approved representative for the women of today. How does that make you feel, ladies? She's speaking for you. Just as a reminder, the United States government PR department, made up of various agencies, as of 2016, was spending over $1 billion a year to shape the minds of the public. And we've seen an example of that here tonight, and it's multi-pronged. But the overarching question that we're asking, as always, is the position that's being presented, the philosophy or the worldview that they're proclaiming, or like this gun violence story, is the position coherent or incoherent? Now, with the what is a woman question, is what they're telling us, is the position that they're presenting us coherent or incoherent? That is to say, is what these people are saying founded in truth? Is it lies, or do they just have a shallow grasp of reality? Is it dangerous? How do we respond? That is where Armor of Truth stands out from the crowd in our apologetics and polemics that we engage in here. We have the answers to all the hard questions. Not because we're so smart, but we know where to find them, and you can too. Our mission is to counter this corruption with the cleansing light of absolute truth. As we've said here a few times already in the past week, we now live in a world that has normalized sin, a world that makes laws to make confused people comfortable with their insanity, while at the same time conjuring new ways to label a person mentally ill new classifications. How many ways can you identify yourself as a victim? The culture is depraved. The rulers of today are now seeking to criminalize the truth. And by truth, I mean the gospel and God's ordered way of righteousness. They want to criminalize, mitigate, shut down, shout down anyone who's going to stand up for God's ordered way of righteousness and the gospel. Scripture is your foundation. God's word is your foundation. Think of your worldview as a house. God's word, Scripture, has to be that foundation. Then you need some walls or some pillars. That's the church. And then you can have the roof on your house, your philosophy as your roof. But if you have it the other way around and you have human reason as your foundation, human reason is the sand. Scripture is the rock. So if your worldview, if your approach to life is founded on human reason, human philosophy, you're going to find trouble eventually. Filtering everything through human reason is a sure way to error. Your house will be built on sand. Your house needs a foundation that's immovable. Human reason is not immovable. So we'll jump into this now. What is a woman? Let's look at this. Let's look at this trailer for the official trailer for What is a Woman. Matt Walsh, who is known as a bit of a troublemaker out there with his positions, conservative, secular conservative, I would say. But let's check this out, and then we'll make some comments about what we see here.
What is a woman? Can you tell me that? Well, you're at the Women's March. You must have some idea. Please, if one person could tell me what a woman is.
You are not here for women. We ask you to leave.
What is that?
I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4. I host a talk show. I give speeches. I write books. I like to make sense of things.
A woman is not anything in particular.
There is not one particular thing.
It could be many things to many people.
Some women have penises, right? Some men have vaginas.
I like scented candles, and I've watched Sex and the City.
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm a woman?
That's a great question.
You're not a scientist. You're not a gender studies major.
No.
How do you know that you're a man?
I guess because I got a dick.
Can a man become a woman?
I'm not a woman, so I can't really answer that.
Women only know what women are.
Are you a cat?
No.
Can you tell me what a cat is? Do you want to tell us what a woman is?
I'm a biological woman that medically transitioned to appear like a male. I will never be a man.
And so they go on the internet and they're told that all of their problems will be solved if they become a man.
So you worry that there could be a sort of social contagion element of this?
A teeny tiny bit, maybe.
It got me at 42. Your child doesn't have a chance.
And you're affirming it with hormones that have never been used in this way.
Puberty blockers, which are completely reversible.
Completely reversible.
One of the drugs used is Lupron, right? Which has actually been used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
You know what? I'm not sure that we should continue with this interview.
So you don't want to talk about the drugs that you give to kids, or?
How can they be removing the healthy breasts of 15-year-old girls?
There are masculine girls. There are feminine boys. What are we going to do about that? Carve them up?
How can this whole thing be happening, Matt?
I wanted us to have a safe place to be able to talk about this.
Part of me wants to ask why you care so much.
I care about the truth. I care about children. I care about the women who are having their opportunities stolen from them.
Is it transphobic, to tell the truth?
The interview's over. Let's turn off the cameras.
Excuse me,
They're fair. I just wanted to know, what is a woman?
and you're not gonna find out.
Based on what I'm saying, would you ever want to move to America?
They say no, never.
All right, that's available for you.
We'll see when it comes out.
Yeah. On the Daily Wire, you can go there and website and watch that documentary. So what do you think about that? Let's look. We're going to go and ask David Wood to help us out with this. He saw the documentary. I have not seen the documentary. It just came out. So let's see what D Wood has to say. He's going to tell us what he saw. Let's get you a nice full screen here.
Matt Walsh's new documentary, What is a Woman, has made me transition from I don't really care about this at all to, hey, something really creepy's going on here.
All right, let's right here. Let's get to this point right here. This is what we want to hear.
Not getting any. I mentioned that I wasn't very impressed with the first half of the film, and that's because the first half of the film was pretty much exactly what I was expecting. Based on the little bit I know about Matt Walsh, I was expecting him to interview therapists, professors, doctors, and to ask them what is a woman and to make them look stupid when they can't answer. And there was a lot of that during the first half of the film. Some of the people Matt was interviewing were very nice, very friendly, and even though Matt was usually careful and respectful in the way he was asking questions, you could tell that he ultimately wanted to make them look stupid. And if you think someone has an incoherent position, that's one way to do things. You show that even the experts can't answer simple questions because they have an incoherent position. And if the position that's being imposed on students and professionals right now is incoherent, that needs to be pointed out.
There is a context for righteous mockery. Elijah.
A huge part of this debate is about language. One side is saying something like, hey, there are words like woman that have been used in a certain way for a very long time, but you all need to change the meanings of these kinds of words. And the other side says, well, what are the new meanings? What's the meaning of the word woman that we're supposed to use now? And the response seems to be, we don't know. We don't know what these words mean anymore. But the entire world needs to abandon the way they use these words and adopt our way of using these words, even though we sound like we don't know what we're talking about. To a novice like myself, the idea of telling the entire world to change the way they speak and write and think, when you can't even tell them what they're supposed to be changing to, seems a bit odd. So, when I said that I wasn't very impressed with the first half of the documentary, I didn't mean that Matt wasn't covering anything important. I only meant that it was exactly what I was expecting.
Okay, now, there is one particular statistic here that we need to hold on to, and David's going to mention it in just a moment. I've got it sped up to about 1.25, just a couple more minutes here. I want you to listen for the money. We want to follow the money. Usually that leads us to the culprits. It's no different here. It's no different here. This was something brand new for me. It apparently was for D. Wood also. But listen to how much money it is worth to somebody for just one child to transition. Maybe this is why it's being pushed so hard.
But then, in the second half of the documentary, Matt took some unexpected turns. He visited a tribe in Africa and started asking them the same kinds of questions about gender identity. And they thought the entire discussion was absurd. And you know what? They weren't at all tolerant of the gender identity issues Matt was explaining to them. This raises a question. We're told here in the West that if you have a traditional view of gender, if you're not willing to accept the new rules and the new language, you're an evil bigot and a hate monger. But a lot of people in different parts of the world are not going to accept the new rules and the new language. So, are they evil bigots and hate mongers?
There you go. massive contradiction in their position, their worldview. On that point, it's incoherent, and it gets worse from there. But let's continue.
Have Americans and Europeans turned out to be the good guys because we're far more tolerant of these ideas in America and Europe? In other words, would trans activists say that Americans are morally superior to, say, an African tribe, at least on this issue? I'm asking because I always hear that we're the worst people in the world. So I found Matt's trip to Africa fascinating. But when he got back from Africa, that's when I started hearing about a bunch of stuff I didn't know about. I didn't know about people like Alfred Kinsey and John Money and their theories and their experiments and how their views and methods came to dominate so much of our thinking in the West. I didn't know that every child who decides to transition generates, on average, $1.3 million for pharmaceutical companies.
There you go. How about that? Anybody out there aware of that statistic? Let's check that out one more time.
So much of our thinking in the West. I didn't know that every child who decides to transition generates, on average, $1.3 million for pharmaceutical companies. Now, that's the sort of thing that could change my perspective on all of this. A few years ago, when the biggest companies in the world started tripping over each other in their efforts to show how pro all things LGBTQ they were, I thought they were just trying to avoid a potential blowback from the woke mob. But if pushing gender ideology on children is just an easy way to get more of them to transition, and getting kids to transition puts billions and billions of dollars into the bank accounts of the biggest companies in the world, that would seem a bit more diabolical, wouldn't it? Keep in mind, I do not know what I'm talking about yet. Apart from some brief research on Alfred Kinsey and John Money, I have not studied the claims made in What is a Woman? I will take a closer look at those claims, and I will be examining responses to those claims. But if it turns out that massive corporations are using their influence to convince a generation of young people to transition in order to make endless chunks of money, well, let's just say they will have earned my attention.
And I'll tell you this, he's got the people behind him to cause a stir on that one. So let's pray that Dave gets that information and runs with it. So there you go. What was it? 1.3 million bucks. That's what it's worth to the pharmaceutical industry if your son or daughter comes home and wants to transition. And the schools, of course, are encouraging it, pushing it. In fact, until they were found out in Florida, they were doing it behind the parents' backs. That was the motivation behind the Don't Say Gay bill. All the bill intended to do was just leave them alone through third grade. Right? That's all the bill said. Just don't talk sex, gender, and transition or masturbation. Don't talk that with them until they're out of the third grade. That's all the bill asked for. And you saw what happened. They went berserk. It's because they want the children. So we're asking the question here, though. What is a woman? Thank you to Rita. Thanks, Rita, for your super chat earlier. Folks, if you'd like to help support us, you can do that. You go to armoroftruth.net and hit the donate tab. And many ways, links in this description if you like to donate privately and don't need a receipt or anything. There's ways in there to do that. You can also do it through these super chats here on YouTube. So thank you. Thank you, Rita, for that. What is a woman? Let's see here. We want to get to Jada Pinkett's red table. Let's do that now. right? Because after that, we're going to deal with Amber Heard's lawyer. So let's go ahead and listen to this. She's going to be talking about her husband, Will Smith, and Chris Rock. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because this is the perspective of strong women in the world. This is what she represents. So let's listen.
Now, about Oscar night, my deepest hope is that these two intelligent, capable men have an opportunity to heal, talk this out, and reconcile.
She's talking about Will Smith and Chris Rock, for those who may be unaware.
The world today, we need them both. And we all actually need one another more than ever. Until then, Will and I are continuing to do what we have done for the last 28 years. And that's keep figuring out this thing called life together.
Always learning, always seeking, never learning. Does that sound familiar?
Thank you for listening.
Okay, so that's her statement. I heard someone say earlier today about this. What in the world what does Chris Rock have to work out? He got clocked on television. If it's real, I still can't. I'm still not in the camp that was a real smack. If he did hit him, it was he's an actor. He knows how to hit somebody without leaving a mark. You can practice it. You can teach yourself to do that. He didn't go up there and clock him. All that aside, let's don't get caught up in that. What has she said here? Will Smith went up there. He walked up there and destroyed himself. Right, that's what he did. And if you saw, again, I'm sure most of you, if you're faithful Christians, you're not watching much of this stuff, but we do try to aim a lot of our content toward those who are not in the faith, so we can get their attention and bring them to the gospel, bring the gospel to them. So there's no contrition on her part here at all. No responsibility taken at all. If you saw what happened, Rock makes a joke at her expense. Will thinks it's funny. She doesn't. But he doesn't know she doesn't think it's funny yet. And at some point when the camera was away, he happened to look over at her and said, uh-oh, she's not happy. And he knew it was going to be curtains for him later. So he did what he did after that. She didn't try to stop him. In fact, there's a cell phone footage from behind there of someone who was in there when it happened. She was laughing. She was just laughing. She was just okay with it. She was not more than okay with it. It was amusing to her. Her husband, man, she claims to love. She watches him walk up there and, if it's all real, destroying himself. But then, of course, you can take the cynical route, which we do a lot, and say that, well, it was all staged. Everything right down to the last detail. I don't know. I don't go that far. I think these things are more complex than that. But I mean, these are human beings, all flawed. You can't get all these human beings together without the plan. You can't plan it. You can't plan everything. So interesting. This is how womanhood is presented today. You don't need to take responsibility. You can just sit there and talk about the other people and talk about what happened. You can sit there and present yourself as a victim. Speaking of that, speaking of presenting yourself as a victim, let me share the latest Armor of Truth meme with you.
You're saying it's Johnny, it's the people who support him. And after a hard loss, it's easy to point to the other side. But what about your team? Do you feel like you guys made any mistakes along the way?
No. Depp's team, they don't have evidence. Is there something else we feel we should have done? No. Are any of us perfect? Yes, absolutely. It was like a Roman Colosseum, a major setback for women.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's right. We got Dr. James White to comment on the Depp trial. No, we didn't. That was our attempt at a meme. But did you see that stare? Where in the world was it?
But what about your team? Do you feel like you guys made any mistakes along the way?
No. Depp's team, they don't have
No
evidence.
mistakes.
Is there something else we feel we should have done? No.
There you go. That stare. Look at that. He's not buying it, folks. He is not buying it. He was over it. That was an excellent question. He hasn't believed her since she walked in the room. But let's hear a little more from this interview and try to understand why is it that womanhood is under attack, and how is it under attack?
Jury's decision to side with Johnny Depp in his defamation lawsuit is drawing both condemnation and praise. The verdict came after 6 weeks of very dramatic testimony from both sides. She claimed that he abused her, while he said she was the abuser. In his reaction, Depp wrote, "The goal of bringing the case was to reveal the truth, and that truth never perishes." Elaine Charlson-Bredehoff is the attorney for Amber Heard and is with us now. And we should mention, we did also reach out to Johnny Depp's team, but they declined to be interviewed this morning. Elaine, thank you. We're so very glad you're here.
Thank you.
We heard Amber's reaction to the verdict yesterday. This seems to be a huge victory for Johnny Depp this morning.
Yeah, a major setback for women, for women inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom.
Because?
Wasn't a major setback for Camille Vasquez. Major setback for women inside the courtroom and outside. Well, let's look at this. Attorney on Johnny Depp's team. Here's a tweet. Congratulations. She has Brown and Rudnick are pleased to announce that Camille Vasquez has been elevated to partner. She was a key member of the litigation team that won a jury verdict last week for Johnny Depp in his defamation trial against ex-wife Amber Heard. And there you go. There's congratulations to newly promoted partner, Camille Vasquez. All right, so was it really a setback for women inside and outside of the courtroom? All of them? You see how this narrative works, right? Victimhood. It's victimhood culture.
Because basically what this said, Amber had an enormous amount of evidence, although a lot of it was suppressed in this case as opposed to the UK. But look at all the women who have no evidence, all these women who suffer from domestic.
I'm not going to be commenting on the evidence, whether it was, whether she told the truth or didn't, or whether he told the truth or didn't. That's for you to decide on your own. What we're here to talk about is how are women being portrayed. This narrative it's all about being a victim. Remember, intersectionality is kind of like that, where you find as many ways as you possibly can to identify as a minority or as someone who's oppressed in your culture.
Violence, domestic abuse, they don't have evidence. And basically what this jury said is unless you pull out your cell phone and you tape record your spouse beating you, you're out of luck.
But Elaine, I think it was bigger than that, because you had the evidence, as you say, but they did not believe her.
Yeah, so the mainstream is really, they're aware that the public is so one-sided in the public. So the mainstream is still trying to carry water for the Me Too movement and still trying to frame women as perpetual victims for some reason. But still here, that even so many people are not buying the story they heard there. They're still having to at least appear to be fair.
Why do you think they did not believe her?
I think that a lot of that was that it was Johnny Depp.
Okay, so here's this is the big thing this week with she said that they took no responsibility for her performance, her ability to represent her client. Probably she had a horrible client to deal with. Her client may have been trying to tell her what to do, and of course I guess that's the client's prerogative. But she's now out there on the circuit promoting this narrative. She had another interview after this one, said exactly the same script, but fresh air blew into the room shortly after this.
I think the celebrity status.
But she's a celebrity too.
And it's not only not believing her.
But she's a celebrity too.
Right.
But you have to remember, it's a tale of two trials. All the evidence came in the UK. Mr. Depp brought that one. The burden of proof was on the son in the UK because they had called him a wife beater and talked about the domestic violence. He had his opportunity to tell the truth then. And a 3-week trial, he lost. The judge.
So the message here is, look, we had all the evidence. It was rigged. It was fixed. It's not fair.
Found 12.
And then former NFL player Nate Burleson, who's here on the right, wide receiver in the NFL for many years. He's a man who, from his career, you can guarantee, from his career, maybe it even happened to himself, but he has surely has had a few buddies who've been falsely accused of something like this. Maybe he probably had a few buddies who were rightfully accused, but you can tell by the look on his face, he's seen and heard this story before. This is what happens now.
Acts of domestic violence, including sexual violence. And that came out November 2, 2020. We weren't allowed to tell the jury that.
By the way, a 7-person jury decided that none of that, decided, well, for Johnny Depp, that his all of his, he proved defamation with malice, which is an extremely difficult thing to do, I've learned, and since it's ended. Unanimous, right? A jury of her peers.
Well, it's a different system, and the judge, it wasn't a jury, it was a judge. The judge said it was substantially true, and that is significant, and I think surprised a lot of legal analysts. But, in this case, the jury not only didn't believe Amber Heard, but in ruling that she acted with actual malice, that means she had the intent to cause harm, right? That's a pretty high standard to have proven.
And it's pretty amazing since the op-ed never even mentioned Mr. Depp. You have to remember that.
But still, 7 people, a jury of Amber Heard's peers decided that, yeah, that was about him. So the truth is not present here.
They learned from the UK case.
This is spin, of course. This is what it looks like. This is the narrative today. We can see that this narrative is much broader than just this story. We're not covering this because we're really interested in Heard Depp. We're covering this because we analyze the narrative, the overall narrative in our culture. And here you're seeing something that is, even the United Nations. It even comes from places like the World Economic Forum, where they support movements like Me Too and whatever movement serves to demoralize culture.
Is to demonize Amber, which is what they did, and to try to suppress as much of the evidence that came in the UK and did
Nate
not
Burleson's
come
going to respond to that now. So she said, we didn't do anything wrong. We proved our case. The jury was tampered with or something. We just, we did everything we could do. We did everything right. I'll fast forward here. Here you go. Here's Nate. I gave you our meme version, so let's let you hear his actual comments because this is sensible. It can even be supported biblically.
Hard and lost that battle. So it should not have happened.
So I am a former NFL player, and after a hard loss, it's easy to wake up and point to the other side.
oftentimes I realized the better thing to do was to look in the mirror. What mistakes did I make as a player? What mistakes did our coaching staff make? And then how can we improve from there? Do you feel like you guys made any mistakes along the way? Do you feel like Amber made a mistake while she was on the stand? Because you're saying it's the celebrity, it's Johnny, it's the people who support him. But what about you and your team?
Well, and that's an excellent question.
She was stunned.
And to say, and Amber even said on the stand, I am not perfect. I am a human being. These people were giving her death threats. They threatened to microwave her baby. This is the kind of social...
And there's that 1,000-yard stare. Not buying it. So he's heard this before. And sadly, this is an all too common narrative today where you must believe the woman. Let's get a couple of these articles about this case. Bear with me, I've lost my way here in our graphics. I don't know what happened to my show. There we go. So at Vox, you'll hear this presented this way. Let's see how Vox and The Atlantic, how are they reporting? Vox is saying, after 5 years of anticipation, it's now clear the long-awaited and much-dreaded backlash to the Me Too movement is here. On May 2nd, a draft leaked of a Supreme Court opinion that would strike down Roe v. Wade, and with it, American women's rights to reproductive freedom. Reproductive freedom. That's reproductive freedom. Right there. This is Vox, of course. On June 1st, Johnny Depp won his defamation suit against Amber Heard, who alleged he abused her. Depp's argument, which the jury apparently agreed with, right, this is supposed to be independent journalism, which the jury apparently agreed with, was that Heard had, in fact, abused him and lied about it. And, of course, they qualify that in parentheses here. Heard won one count of defamation of her own against Depp's former lawyer, Adam Waldman. It's only fitting that the cultural moment that began with women speaking out against the powerful men who they say hurt them announced its end by the courts, finding in favor of one of those men. Now that's irresponsible journalism. To say Johnny Depp is one of those men. Johnny Depp is just like Harvey Weinstein. Or Kevin Spacey. No, that's not right. They say every wave of feminist activism is greeted by a backlash. The political action of the 1970s met with the reactionary work of Phyllis Schlafly and her cohort, who killed the Equal Rights Amendment. The girl power ethos of 90s third wave feminism gave way to the virginity-obsessed purity culture of the Bush era. Virginity-obsessed. This is where we live now, folks. Sodom and Gomorrah. We live in a highly depraved society. Virginity-obsessed. Really? And now, 5 years after the Me Too movement entered its most public phase with the 2017 downfall of Harvey Weinstein, fourth wave feminism has met its own backlash. Here's where the reaction leaves us. Currently, our legal system seems to be on the brink of recognizing neither women's right to control their bodies nor women's right to speak about the violence that has been done to their bodies. Now, when it comes to abortion, rape and incest aside, we saw the numbers on those. That's less than 0.5%. But that aside, you have full control of your body when you get pregnant. It didn't just happen. Pregnancy doesn't fall out of a tree and hit you on the head. So these arguments are terrible. It's bad. It's Pardon me. It's a stupid culture. Quoting Richard Grannon there. He said that recently, and I happen to agree with him on that. It's a stupid culture. Depp's victory does not come from a criminal trial. They qualify. It was a civil case about a newspaper op-ed. The Washington Post in 2018, Heard wrote an op-ed titled, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath." She actually didn't even write the article, but she had to stand there and represent it. It was written by the ACLU. Heard never mentions Depp in there, but 7 jurors, her peers, that her lawyers selected to be in that jury, decided that, yeah, that was about him, obviously. But she refers to herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. She identifies herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. Now, if you're a woman out there, you've experienced domestic abuse, do you think this helps or hurts? Her behavior, her lawyers' unfamiliarity with the truth, disregard for the truth. So many people are saying that, because look at this verdict, the pendulum's going to swing back to traditional values now because people have had it with Me Too and all that. Okay, I hope so. That would be a nice break for a while, but I don't know, because look at what's happening now. The mob is behind these lies. When I say lies, I'm not talking about her case in the court. I'm talking about her lawyer. Her lawyer sitting there clearly not taking any responsibility, and misrepresenting women. As you let's see, do we have this? There's a piece right here at the end. Listen to this.
She wouldn't have done this if he had been hitting her. That was their... Absolutely believe that, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence, much of which did not. We had.
Elaine, how is she today? What is her next move?
She's right. Well, her next move is appeal. There were
but
a
she's
number.
Heartbroken.
She is heartbroken, and one of the first things that she said when she came back from the verdict, when we went into the conference room, was, "I am so sorry to all these women."
She said that?
Yes.
Did you hear Nate Burleson there? He's like, did she said that? Listen to this again. Listen to Nate. Hey, let's slow it down so you can hear it. Listen to Nate Burleson when she says that. He's like, what? She said that? Everybody at that table knows she didn't say that. That's a press release. That's what her lawyer said that they're going to say for her. She walked out of that courtroom. She was angry.
Contemporaneous. We had text.
Let's get right.
So how is she today?
Sorry, I've got it slowed down so we can hear it, Nate.
Heartbroken. And one of the first things that she said when she came back from the verdict, when we went into the conference room, was, "I am so sorry to all these women."
She said that?
Yes.
She said that? Yeah.
To all these women.
She said that?
Yes.
See, Nate's not buying it. He feels like a lot of people out here today that this is bad news for us. So this is Vox's. We've read a little bit of Vox's take on it for you. It says this verdict is as much as to say that anyone who says the phrase "I was abused" can be sued as a liar. That's not what happened there. That's not what happened there. So the mainstream's trying to, that side of the movement is trying to make it sound like, well, women are just more oppressed than ever now. Because if you say you've been abused, you can be sued as a liar. If you don't have any evidence to support your claim in court, you can't win unless you go to the UK and get a bench trial where a judge just decides because he's got to conflict of interest. He knows people. Anyway, that's a different story. Let's don't get into that. It says Depp's fans are already rallying behind his friend Marilyn Manson, who was accused of abuse by Evan Rachel Wood. So, separate story. I don't know anything about that. Both Depp fans and major cultural institutions are reacting to this news with a glee that would have been unthinkable 4 years ago. Anyway, so it just goes on to, in the same tone. The Atlantic. Title of the article is "The First Amendment Will Survive Johnny Depp." That's the other argument here. That's deplorable. They're claiming that this result, that Amber Heard's First Amendment right of freedom of speech, has been violated. So the Atlantic is saying that the First Amendment will survive. Many observers are wondering if a recalibration of First Amendment law is occurring in the United States. The jury spent dozens of hours deliberating, evaluating 6 weeks' worth of testimony and evidence. It ultimately decided that the preponderance of evidence favored Depp. That's a purely probabilistic judgment, reflecting a conclusion that Johnny Depp was at least 1% more likely to be telling the truth than Amber Heard. Yeah. I hope you didn't watch much of it, but if you did, you know what that means. You know why that's silly. Clearly, the jury did not find Depp wholly credible either. It also, somewhat paradoxically, held Depp liable to the tune of $2 million for statements his attorney made calling Heard's claims a hoax. I think I can tell you why the jury decided to give Amber Heard some money. Would make her appeal more difficult. Apparently that jury realized that everything that came in from that side was just not true, and a lot of it was fabricated. Was shown to have been fabricated there in the case. But if you give her a little settlement, then they can't walk out of the courtroom saying it's all rigged. Right? No, you won $2 million off of him. According to The Atlantic, it's a toss-up. It would be a mistake to draw any sweeping conclusions from it. You see how obviously they're avoiding what's going on here. They're just not going to hold her accountable. But 7 jurors unanimously decided on every single point of defamation, and there were several. So, blame the court system. Blame the jurors. They were tampered with. I can't help but think of similar alarm bells rung by many in the media back in 2016. That was when the former professional wrestler Hulk Hogan obtained a judgment against the website Gawker for publishing snippets of a video depicting him having sex. It was a shocking verdict, not because Gawker was found liable. There's absolutely no reasonable argument for publishing a surreptitiously recorded private encounter between consenting adults, but because the jury saw fit to award Hogan $140 million in damages, sending Gawker to bankruptcy. How could journalists critically report about public figures without facing the same fate as Gawker? As it turned out, just fine. Shortly after Gawker's demise, the New Yorker and the New York Times catalyzed the Me Too movement by exposing Harvey Weinstein's behavior. So this is what we need to get, what Johnny Depp represents. Right now, forget about Johnny Depp and Jack Sparrow. He's representing men in this culture right now. So he's going to catch all kinds of hardships. And Harvey Weinstein is representing men. So Johnny Depp he's Harvey Weinstein. This is how these things work out. In the years that followed, hundreds more powerful men have been exposed as abusers. And if they are abusers, they should be. I'm sure our justice system doesn't get it right all the time, but it seems like in this case, it couldn't have been handled more fairly if you've watched any of it. Hardly any of them have challenged the allegations in court. Indeed, the majority of defamation lawsuits arising out of the Me Too have been filed by victims suing abusers for calling them liars, not vice versa. More about the First Amendment. More than anything, it was a wake-up call that juries value privacy differently than they do reputation. So that's the argument. The argument is that someone's First Amendment rights have been violated, or that the First Amendment doesn't mean what it used to mean because someone came into court and couldn't prove their case. In fact, she could have committed perjury. So, I don't want to spend too much time with the Atlantic. Let's get out of that. Let's move on here. Once again, let's just make this point. Where is the celebration for this woman right here? Right? She has just been promoted. It's a big deal for a woman who's in law, for an attorney, a litigator. Right? So where's the celebration for her? Shouldn't Elaine Brederhoft, a fellow litigator, be happy for this one? So we look at, just briefly at Amber Heard's post-trial statement, which I had. Let's get that up here for you. I think I've still got that link, so you can have a visual for it. So she put it out on Instagram just as soon as the trial was over. We want to read it and just skim through it and look for what is this narrative here about. Let's do it right here. There we go. What's interesting too is if you read the comments. I mean, these people they don't know her, but they think they know her well enough to love her. She says, "The disappointment I feel today is beyond words. I'm heartbroken that the mountain of evidence still was not enough to stand up to the disproportionate power, influence, and sway of her ex-husband, Johnny Depp. I'm even more disappointed with what this verdict means for other women. It's a setback." We heard that before. It sets back the clock to a time when women who spoke up and spoke out could be publicly shamed and humiliated. Is that really what's happened here? Women out there, do you feel like the clock has been turned back because of the outcome in this case? It sets back the idea that violence against women is to be taken seriously. So we can't take women seriously anymore, is what she says. She has announced herself, proclaims herself a representative for women. She says, "I believe Johnny's attorneys succeeded at getting the jury to overlook the key issue of freedom of speech." Freedom of speech. And ignore evidence that was so conclusive that we won in the UK. Once again, that was a very different situation. It was not a jury. It was just a judge. And the judge was, without getting into it, was obviously compromised. And I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care one way or the other. It doesn't matter. Amber Heard or Johnny Depp, I don't. But it's this is just way, way obvious. So she believes that his attorneys succeeded in getting the jury to overlook the key issue of freedom of speech and ignore evidence that was so conclusive. She says, "I'm sad I lost this case, but I'm Sadder still that I seem to have lost a right I thought I had as an American to speak freely and openly. This is not surprising. We should not be surprised by any of this. With what we've talked about so far here today, what would we expect in a depraved nation? People who have rejected, who know God exists, know God is real, they know his statutes, they have the moral law written on their heart, but they suppress that truth in unrighteousness. What would you expect? What would be the first sign, or one of the first signs that a nation that God had just given a nation over to its own desires and depravity? Romans chapter 1 right here. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. They didn't love the truth. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for idols, self-made idols. Therefore, God gave them up to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who's blessed forever. Amen. One of the first things you would expect when God has given a nation over to its own desires, withdrawing his grace and letting the people run wild in their own desires, you would see a sexual revolution. You would see this kind of depravity. God gave them over to dishonorable passions. The women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. That's lesbianism. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. That's homosexualism. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. What is the due penalty for their error? Well, all of this stuff that comes along with that lifestyle. Disease, confusion, futile thinking. So let's look at now something that's very interesting that Summer found for us, and I'm fascinated by this. Matthew Littlefield. Is this new feminism really new? Is it satanic? We're right at an hour and a half, so this is going to be good. We look forward to sharing more of these two perspectives we're going to share here with you from Matthew Littlefield and the other gentleman here, Per Faxneld. Satanic feminism. Is our culture now more like the Christian one that preceded us, or like the satanic one that sought to push us in a new direction? I think the answer is resounding. We live in a Satandom. Conclusively, unequivocally, this is demonstrable, and I'm going to demonstrate it with this series, says Littlefield. Our culture was deliberately, cleverly, and systematically subverted. Much of that which we call virtuous today was considered the utmost of wickedness not very long ago. Today, we consider a woman who sends her children to child care a strong, independent woman. Not so long ago, this sort of woman could have been challenged by polite society. Today, we consider abortion a right. We consider it health care. Not so long ago, it was considered the utmost of wicked crimes. Today, we consider a man who sends his daughter off to war a progressive. Indeed, even conservative men brag about this. Not so long ago, this man would not have been considered a man at all. Today, we consider many things to be virtues which would have been considered the utmost wickedness not so long ago. The usual answer to this by moderns and postmoderns is that we have progressed. That we have progressed. Indeed, even conservative men brag about this. Not so long ago, this man would not have been considered a man. More on your screen here. Today, we consider many things to be virtues, which would have been considered the utmost wickedness not so long ago. Littlefield says, I refer to this as modern supremacy, the idea that an idea or people is superior by virtue of its existing in the current year. C.S. Lewis called this chronological snobbery. But this is foolish. Current year does not equal better, right? Just because we're ahead of some other people on the timeline doesn't mean that we're better. It's just a reference to placement in time. Especially not if we're aware of this. The Bible is a vital column underpinning true Western society. You wouldn't have had this amazing experiment in freedom, which, of course, we can see what man's heart does with his liberty. Look, there you go. That's what man's heart does with his liberty. He seeks autonomy. With God's common grace, he gives man freedom and liberty. A government of the people, by the people, for the people. And they just run wild. Not all, but a large enough portion that we can see the end is near. The Bible is a vital column underpinning true Western society. It's common for Westerners to be ignorant of this fact, but the Bible is one of the cornerstones of Christendom and our entire heritage. Now, here's the article, The Transgender Origin of Feminism. Specifically, Satanic feminism. Deuteronomy 22:5, a woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination. There aren't many sins that the Lord calls an abomination. But that's one of them. There's an interesting insanity that is happening in the feminist movement at the moment, a battle for supremacy. Who are the combatants? Women stand in one corner. Who stands in the other corner? Men dressed as women. A remarkable situation and one that is confusing to many people. Gender politics has for some time now focused on those who were perceived to be the most marginalized. And that is no longer women or even women of color. It's men who want to identify as women. This has caused a chasm in the feminist identity politics movement because now men are claiming women's rights, but doing it as women, quote unquote. Should women recognize these men's claims to the rights of being protected women? Or should they balk at the idea of having to share women's spaces and women's issues with people born with penises? Where should feminism draw the line? This issue has been made famous by the recent approval of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court of the United States, who gave a remarkable answer to what should be a simple question. She claimed that she could not define what a woman was because she was not a biologist, which is clearly absurd. But this is the quandary that intersectional feminism and large portions of the left now find themselves in. This same circus was repeated at an Australian Senate estimates hearing. One Australian senator asked, "Can someone please provide me with a definition of what a woman is?" And he got this response, quote, "I think there are a variety of definitions, and I think perhaps to give a more fulsome answer, we should take that on notice," the secretary said. The liberal senator interrupted to explain he was after a simple definition, to which Dr. Murphy said, quote, there are a variety. It's a very contested space at the moment, Dr. Murphy said. Now, these are great examples in doublespeak that will, and double talk as well. We'll talk about that in our next Armor of Truth live show. These are good examples that it's a very contested space at the moment. That's just a nice way of saying this one's too hot. I'm not going to say one way or the other because I'm afraid of those people. What does that mean, a very contested space? It's absurd, but people are confused why progressives who have pushed women's issues for so long are now buckling under transgender activism and are giving up on being able to define the women they always said they were advocating for. Was feminism not about lifting women up from the beginning? How did it become about denying or erasing their existence altogether? You might be surprised to hear the answer to this question. Littlefield writes here, Matthew Littlefield, what I want to show in this piece is something that many people are just not aware of. That transgenderism was an integral part of the feminist movement from the beginning. Observe what the word transgenderism means. The word itself. It is a state or condition in which a person's identity does not conform unambiguously to conventional ideas of male or female gender. In other words, it means to transgress all gender boundaries. You can't be labeled at all. You can't be identified objectively. Your identification is only subjective. Trans activists generally acknowledge that sex differences exist in biological realities, but they assert that gender is a state of identity, or how you feel about your gender representation. You may be biologically male, but psychologically female, or vice versa. In essence, the trans activist wants to smash gender boundaries, which is precisely what the feminist claims as well. Feminists generally refer to this as the glass ceiling, and it is the concept that wherever men have gone, women can go too, and they should go there as well. So if feminists also want to transgress gender boundaries, is there a more explicit connection between the origins of the feminist movement and transgender ideas? Matthew Littlefield says, yes, there most certainly is. And Per Faxneld, Swedish writer, Per Faxneld is a Swedish historian of religion, PhD in history of religions. His field of specialization is Western esotericism, new religions, and alternative spirituality. For example, Satanism, Theosophy, Anthroposophy. That one gets me every time. New Age, the sacralization of physical exercise and all that, with a particular emphasis on how they are formed in tandem with the processes of modernization, especially secularization. In other words, this is right up our alley. Per Faxneld has documented this in his important work titled Satanic Feminism. Here is the book. The full title is Satanic Feminism, Lucifer as Liberator of Woman in 19th Century Literature. The book addresses how anti-clerical feminists, primarily during the time period of 1880 through 1930, used Satan as a symbol of rejecting the patriarchal traits of Christianity. I emphasized how these women were inspired by the period's most influential new religion, Theosophy, and how the anti-religious discourses of secularism impacted feminism. So when you're wondering why is Jada Pinkett Smith so utterly confused about her role in the world? Why is Amber Heard so utterly confused about her role in the world? She's also apparently bisexual. I don't think there's any such thing as bisexual. You're homosexual or you're not. That bisexual distinction is another construct, of course. But anyway, why are these women who are being held up and presented to you as, look at these strong women? Why is that? Who's responsible for that? Lucifer was reconceptualized as a feminist liberator of womankind, and Eve became a heroine. In these reimaginings, Satan is an ally in the struggle against a patriarchy supported by God the Father and his male priests. This study delineates how such satanic feminism is expressed. Figures like the suffragette Elizabeth Cady Stanton, author and diplomat wife Ano Callas, gender-bending theosophist Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, actress Sarah Bernhardt, anti-clerical witch enthusiast Matilda Jocelyn Gage, decadent Marchioness Luisa Casati, and the Luciferian lesbian poetess Renee Vivian. The analysis focuses on interfaces between esotericism, literature, art, and the political realm, which is everything we're talking about. New light is thus shed on neglected aspects of the intellectual history of feminism, Satanism, and revisionary myth-making. And that's per Faxneld's book, Satanic Feminism. Lucifer as the liberator of woman. In the book, Faxneld writes more. For example, in this book, he also says, of course, Genesis 3 is a central story in our culture, even pertaining to matters that do not relate to gender. R.W.L. Moberly asserts about the fall narrative, quote, no story from the Old Testament has had a greater impact upon the theology of the Christian church and the art and literature of Western civilization. So that's how important the fall is. This author named Mettinger, there's not enough vowels in his name for me to pronounce it in English. Mettinger views the issue at stake to be, quote, whether the two humans will respect the line of demarcation between themselves and the divine world. This is known as the creator-creature distinction, and it is one of the most important elements that a Christian needs to hold on to have a firm foundation about the fall. Before we can lay a foundation, it's best to know what sort of house we're going to build, right? Who are we? The hubris theme is in fact recurrent throughout the chapters of Genesis. For example, we see it again in the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, where mankind tries to construct a tower reaching in the heavens and is punished by God, who creates the different languages so that men can no longer understand one another and cooperate on this blasphemous building project. Now I ask you, think about the Tower of Babel in that story. They all got together and decided, in suppressing the truth and unrighteousness about, they knew who God was. They had that moral law in their heart. They had the creation around them. It was declaring God to them. And they started building this tower because they're going to be smarter than God. They're going to outwit the Creator. And so he just confuses their languages. Does it feel like a little bit like that might be what's going on right now? He's confusing our languages. To stop. God is restraining evil. God hasn't lost control. Not the author of evil, but he's certainly the restrainer of it. And he allows it to occur for his purposes. But does it sound even just a little bit possible that here it is again? People of the earth are suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, and God is confusing their languages again. That's just a little sidebar by me. In other words, a foundational aspect of Western society is knowing our place in relation to God, the creator-creature distinction. And Genesis 3, Genesis 11, and other biblical accounts have played a vital role in making this a foundational idea. This is the reason why, since Constantine, kings and emperors could not get away with claiming to be gods, and is a big part of the reason that historically Western men led the church, the political structures, and other aspects of society. If a Western king forgot his place in reference to God, the rest of society would shout, "Know your place." Indeed, this shout was led by the church. Many people say that that restrainer mentioned in the letters to the Thessalonians, that the church is actually the restrainer of evil in the world just by its existence. And men are reminded by Genesis 3 that when the first man neglected his duty to lead, this led to the fall of humanity into doom, a powerful warning. Now that's the Christian worldview. It's not men dominating women. The fall happened because Adam didn't properly disciple his wife. He's responsible. Of course, wicked elements in the West knew that to change the West, foundational passages like these need to be subverted. In other words, that distinction there, the creator-creature distinction needs to be muddled, and the male-female arrangement, hierarchy, needs to be muddled as well. Hence, Paxneld also wrote this in the book. He said, 19th century feminists often felt they somehow had to deal with the male chauvinists' use of the story of Genesis 3. One way of doing so, which seems to have been quite widespread, was to turn the tale on its head, making Eve a heroine and the serpent benevolent. The present study tells the history of how this type of tactic, a counter-hegemonic interpretation or counter-reading, was also used to subvert various other aspects of the mythology of woman as Lucifer's confederate. Paxneld's work explains how Western society was successfully subverted, and with the help of Paxneld's writing here, it says, "We live in a satanic era. The devil is the ruler of this world," simply meaning that people are following after his agenda. He's not the God of this world. He is the one that people have chosen. Jesus said, you're either with me or against me. So those who are not followers of Christ are, by default, they've taken the devil on as their ruler. And hence we should expect him to have a level of supremacy in the culture of this fallen world. If so many people are following after Satan, knowingly or not, then we would expect to see that evidence in the world, wouldn't we? But there are degrees to which his evil can be pushed back. The West of the past is an example of that pushback. The West of today is an example of how clever the devil is in gaining background and gaining back the ground he may have lost. We who believe in Christ are called to stand against evil, and those who don't, well, even many of them are waking up to just how evil really is. Evil must be resisted. You hear a lot of people say that today, especially on YouTube and this truth movement. Right? Resist. Stand up. Wake up. Resist. But without a firm foundation in the Christian worldview, you're still just treading water. So here, Matthew Littleton goes on to explain how he documented in earlier places the inherent connections between Luciferian ideas and early feminism. It's enough to note that proto-feminists and early feminists reinterpreted the actions of the devil in Genesis 3. Rather than viewing the serpent as deceiving the woman, who then gave the fruit to her husband, they reinterpreted this event as liberating the woman from her bondage to man and to God, i.e. the patriarchy. This is where the concept of overturning the patriarchy actually comes from. Satan. Overcoming God. Antinomianism. Anarchy is satanic at its root. But what is important for our current piece here is that this means that the early feminists presented Lucifer or the devil as their liberator rather than as their enemy. Now it is a truism of Christian theology that people will be conformed to the image of the gods they worship and adhere to. So what is the image of the devil? So let's understand this. And what do we actually see in our culture right now? Conceptually, people think of the devil as masculine. Right? Generally, the devil, he's out there prowling around like a roaring lion. Typically, he's thought of as masculine. He is the ultimate bad guy, with double emphasis on the bad and the guy. Traditionally, theologians have largely conceptualized the devil as a man or a man-like figure and denoted him with the masculine pronoun he. However, as Faxnell notes, not all have agreed with this summation. As the devil is an angel, this means he does not conform to the gender norms that men and women are formed. Christian theological tradition does not require that the devil conforms to a particular sex. Indeed, it was recognized that demons could take the forms of any gender as they chose, if they chose to manifest themselves in a human body. Anyone who has read the ancient Greek tales will be familiar with the way that the Greek deities could change gender at will, often using this trick to trick their victims and even at times the heroes of the tale. Minerva in Homer's Odyssey is one example, but Odin was known to do the same thing, and many others. In fact, it was a consistent theme throughout the pagan pantheons to have gods transgressing all boundaries, including gender boundaries. From a Christian perspective, these beings were neither fake nor gods. They were a combination of legends and people's encounters with demonic beings. It's easy to understand why the early church and many in the medieval church viewed Satan neither as male nor female, but as a boundary transgressing being who took on the form that was useful at the moment. Right? This is the idea that we need to grasp and hold on to. The adversary intends to seduce people, especially wants to try to seduce Christians. Unbelievers, it's much easier. But if you're going to be seduced, it's not going to be by something that you're repulsed by. It's going to be something that's attractive to you, something that draws you closer to it, an angel of light. In many medieval and early modern representations of the devil, he is shown to be a hermaphrodite monster. Demons were viewed as ontologically unstable creatures that cross gender and species boundaries. Gender bending would then be another sign of this liminal and blasphemously category-defying nature of Lucifer and his demons, as we see here. Baxnell shares some of these abominable examples of how the early modern artists visualized the devils here, the devil, here in figures 1 and 2. You can see this on the left is a Baphomet-like character with male and female features. It was common for the devil and demons to be visualized as inherently unstable beings that conform not only to no gender boundaries, but no natural boundaries either. The devil is the ultimate boundary-breaking entity, which is really a good description of evil itself. Evil intent consists of the desire and intention to transgress the boundaries laid out by God himself. One more time. Evil. What is evil? Evil intent. It is the desire and intention to transgress the boundaries laid out by God himself indeed. So, are we justified then in calling transgenderism, transgender movement, evil? Yes, and we must call evil, evil, and good, good. Isaiah 5, verse 20, well, woe to those who do this. See here in Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light, who put lightness and light for dark, who put bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. And Isaiah is specifically talking here about particular type of corruption that we see today. Woe, verse 21, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine, valiant men mixing strong drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe, those who lie and deprive the innocent of his right. Wouldn't it be just like the devil to make that claim? Oh, you've breached my First Amendment right. It's my First Amendment right to stand here and lie to you. That's what your adversary would do. One of the words for sin in the Bible is transgression, which literally means to transgress the boundaries of what the Lord says is good. Evil inherently transgresses all of God's good boundaries. But not only was the devil represented by such boundary-transgressing beings, but he was also conceptualized or represented as a woman or a serpent woman. For instance, in one Christian work, a French title, the book for the education of his daughters, the author Jeffrey attempts to instill in his daughters the lesson that women should defer to fathers and husbands in anything but domestic matters, and makes his point by retelling how Eve broke this rule when she conversed with the serpent. Which as I'll try to read this in the Old English, which as the history saith, had a face right fair like the face of a woman. It may be strange for us to conceptualize a feminine Satan because it is more common to view him as masculine, but this was a consistent image throughout Christian history. A more straightforwardly female Satan can be seen in the actually very common depictions of the snake in the Garden of Eden with a woman's head on its serpentine body and sometimes also the breasts of a woman. Exactly when the notion of a female snake was established is difficult to say, but the earliest translation of the Bible into Latin rendered the word as serpens, which is feminine gender. Indeed, according to J.B. Trapp, theologian, it was the most frequent way of representing the Edenic serpent from the late 12th century until the late 16th century, when the human feathers of the creature disappear and it becomes once more only reptilian. This is interesting that the devil would be represented by feminine imagery, but again note that the devil is not a man or a woman, presenting himself in the form he chooses. Satan is a fallen spiritual being. The devil is inherently in a different category. Even if you want to argue the scriptures lean towards presenting him as a male figure, note that the view that he transgressed all boundaries is inherent in his rebellion against God's good boundaries and in his role as the evil one. All right, the most famous image, you know this one, right? The most famous image representing the devil's transgender nature is the Baphomet, as we see here in this figure. This is Elvis Levi's version. Baphomet is a hermaphrodite figure and one of the most recognized symbols of Satan in the last century or so. Baphomet was first visually conceptualized by French occultist Elvis Levi in his book Dogma and Ritual of the High Magic. And it was also presented elsewhere. Matthew here says, note, we're not seeking here to establish precisely how Scripture describes the gender of the devil. That's not what this exercise is here. The point is to establish that a lot of historical Christian theology viewed the devil as a being that transgresses all boundaries, and early feminists were inspired by this and took this idea and ran with it. They turned this transgender being into a liberator of women. 19th century feminists often felt they somehow had to deal with male chauvinists' use of the story in Genesis 3. One way of doing so, which seems to have been quite widespread, was to turn the tale on its head, making Eve a heroine and the serpent benevolent. This is also a form of Gnosticism where Genesis 3 is inverted. The founding emphasis of feminism was rebellion against the long-established gender boundaries taught by the Scriptures and applied to Western society. No one really denies this either, but most people are not aware of the full implications of these biblical ideas. They do not understand how rejecting them unleashes satanic forces on society. From very early on, proto-feminists and early feminists sought to break the gender boundaries of how women should be viewed in fiction or in public. An example of this is the son-in-law of the first feminist philosopher, Mary Wollstonecraft. Percy Bysshe Shelley, 1792-1822. In his Revolt of Islam, which was dedicated to his wife Mary Shelley, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, Shelley incorporates both Wollstonecraft's feminist and Godwin's satanic ideas to present to the world a gender boundary breaking hero called Cynthia. That's not Cynthia, it's Cynthia, Cyntha. The poem is filled with obvious satanic imagery. The first part of the poem relates to the tale of a woman giving aid to a fallen serpent referred to as the Morning Star, which was cast to the ground after being defeated by an eagle that represents what the people see as the good God. Now remember, as we were talking with Dr. Costa about these issues, about the symbolism that was misunderstood by Walter Fite and others and other YouTubers, it had nothing to do with a historical approach to these symbols. This is how these symbols were understood. As a part of rebellion, they came to be known as these things. In Shelley's story, the good God is the true archenemy. It says, quote, "This fiend is the creator of death, earthquake, blight, and so on. His enemy, the serpent, is the benefactor of mankind and the enemy of all oppressors. When he once again resumes his combat with God, thrones will shake, and earth's immense and trampled multitude will begin to realize its own power," unquote. So, in Shelley's account here, the serpent is the liberator. The woman teams up, allies herself closely with this serpent, this friend of the oppressed. Very important phrase. The serpent is seen as the friend of the oppressed. Not biblically, but according to these rebel hearts. The next part of the poem recounts the tale of Cynthia and her brother. Cynthia's story in some ways parallels the serpent's. She is the earthly messenger of Satan, the liberator. This messenger propagates feminist ideas and defies gender roles. Cynthia leads the final insurrection against the tyrant Sultan, who is the villain of the tale, which is a quite remarkable role for a woman to be allowed to play. Shelley's intentions are clear. In the revolt of Islam, Shelley was attempting to create a feminist counter-narrative myth to demonstrate ideological opposition to the dominant Christian view of gender roles. Shelley's goal as an advocate of feminism, like his parents-in-law, is to frame God and the patriarchy ordained by God as the force of oppression, and encourage women to realize that they can smash all gender boundaries. Now, when we hear this spoken, when we hear this kind of rhetoric in our culture of oppression, it's the patriarchy oppressing the people. This is where it came from. The father of lies is at the root of it all. Shelley's revolutionary Satanism is combined with what can, without much hesitation, be described as a feminist ideal. This is further reflected, for example, in how Cynthia takes on a role coded as masculine when she comes charging on a black steed, sword in hand, to rescue her brother. Shelley had held a utopian vision that gender differences, detestable distinctions, as he called them in a letter, would surely be abolished in a future state of being. Right? We're evolving. Have you ever heard that from the New Agers? We're evolving, and one day we won't have gender anymore. We'll evolve out of it. Christians often try to argue that the move for equality in society was the result of biblical influence. And by this we mean the egalitarian ideals of men and women being seen as equal in all ways, ability and physically, that there should be no distinction. Some would tell you that's a Christian, that's a biblical influence in the world, equality. Right? However, one thing is certain, the scriptures do not teach equality. We treat everyone equally, but everyone is not equal. That's basic. Critics of the Bible see this clearly, including Faxneld and feminists. The topic of women's status within the early church has been debated for a long time. Looking at Scripture itself, it's easy to find several passages that give strong support to the subordination of women, such as the aforementioned 1 Timothy 2, 11 through 15, but also Titus 2, 3 through 5, Ephesians 5, 22 through 33, Colossians 3, 18, 1 Corinthians 14, verses 34 through 36. Women should remain silent, church. Phrasings like, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord, Ephesians 5:22, and the ways in which they have been used to serve patriarchal ends. Make it easy to see why some feminists would later view God as the protector of patriarchy, and occasionally Satan as an ally in the fight against it. The Bible is clearly patriarchal. That is, supporting leadership by men. It's called headship. There needs to be someone in charge, and this is God's order. The Bible is clearly patriarchal, and it rejects the pretensions of equality, that all people are equal, are created equally. Because of this, feminist approaches to Scripture have flicked between rejecting it outright, rejecting it as modified, and in modern evangelical circles, explaining it away as culturally outdated. Now, today that's the progressive church. Some have said it's irrelevant or superseded. These gender roles, men as the leader. Shelley and other satanic feminists sought to subvert it and reclaim passages like Genesis 3 to align the devil with woman as her liberator. The poem Revolt of Islam was not successful at first, but eventually had a wide impact when it sold in collections of Shelley's works. Brown labels The Revolt of Islam the most powerful feminist poem in the language and the second most thoroughly grounded in the realities of the woman question, being focused squarely on the efforts of the subject sex to cast off the chains of male supremacy. The Victorian poet and feminist Matilda Blind, 1841 to 1896, agreed, excitedly describing Cynthia as a new female type with no previous parallels in literature. So when feminists tell you where their real inspiration came from, take note. Ask a feminist sometime, where did your ideas come from? Where did you get the idea that you wanted to be on this side of this fight? A fighting woman was not completely unknown to Westerners, of course, but Shelley's use of this imagery was novel. To deliberately stir up women to turn against the patriarchy. That was the point. That was the goal. This is a 1904 from a 1904 edition of Shelley's work, this image here. Cynthia is not radical in our modern world, but she was in Shelley's world, and really she was not that long ago as well. The idea of a female soldier charging the enemy lines back then was laughable. It still should be today. But the goal of feminism from the beginning was to subvert gender norms and boundaries. And so this is what feminists did. This is the core of feminism. That all gender boundaries are shackles to be cast off. Feminism is transgenderism. Another early feminist icon that also exhibited this gender-bending characteristic and had a significant influence on the feminist movement was Sarah Bernhardt. She was a French actress in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While you've likely not heard of her, at the time she was incredibly well-known and influential. She was unparalleled in her ability and genius for publicity in her era. Bernhardt is therefore the most well-known of all the individuals discussed in Per Faxnell's studies on satanic feminism. She lived an incredibly rebellious lifestyle that was deliberately immoral and transgressive, openly being a single mom, open adultery, Pink Jada, and flaunting her nudity in her youth. In other words, her credentials as a subversive rule breaker were impeccable. Much of her behavior was clearly disruptive of gender roles, wearing men's clothes on and off stage, and participating in activities considered somewhat controversial for women, all associated with La Nouvelle Femme, the new woman, such as tennis, bicycling, and hot air ballooning, which was quite racy for the day. Some of her activities would have been seen as kind of benign today, but they were utterly scandalous in her time. In fact, the difference between how she would be viewed today and how she was viewed back then is the point of this whole presentation. See how far we've come, right? That's the message. You've come a long way, baby. Right? I guess so. What direction? The difference between how she would be viewed today and how she was viewed back then, and this series on satanic feminism, femininity today, looks more like Sarah Bernhardt than Mary, the mother of Jesus. One of these women is the height of impurity, the other, the model of modesty and purity. You might be thinking, it's not that big a deal. Who knows about this stuff? Who cares? Nobody else knows about this. This is obscure. Well, we live in a culture more influenced by Satanism than Christianity. Mind you, I said our culture. Not our nation, our infrastructure, or what it's founded on, but the culture, meaning the people, what they think, what they do, what they value. We live in a culture more influenced by Satanism than Christianity. Christendom was stolen, and we now live in Satandom, according to Matthew Littleton here. Presenting transgressive women representing themselves as men in the public sphere was a common tactic of the early feminist movement because their goal was always to break all gender boundaries. This is what feminism means in its truest historical definition. Gender boundaries are arbitrary and all of them must go. And is anything really different today? Are there any gender boundaries that modern feminist movements hold sacred? They're just trying to obfuscate the word, the concept of woman altogether today. We can see conclusively that the stoosh between feminists and transgender activists today is not a corruption of the feminist movement. It's not something that's alien to the feminist movement. It is simply the unavoidable, logical extension of the original goals of feminism. And it's really not even new. It was there at the beginning. Shelley held the utopian vision that gender differences, known as detestable distinctions, would surely be abolished in a future state of being. The choice of diabolical imagery for these identity games, which at times engulfed everyday life led by the individuals in question, reveals what the taboos and limits the women consciously transgressed and mocked were tied up with: conservative Christian values. Embracing demons, satanic serpent motifs, and the horrific could hence function as a way of criticizing such values and rejecting them on a symbolic level. In other words, what are we really saying? Demonism was one of the registers of symbolic resistance available for rebellious women to draw on. A philosopher might say that underneath the claims of feminist lies, the ideological foundation for the destruction of all gender boundaries and ideas. They would be correct. Matthew here says, "But as I am a pastor, and I mainly write from the perspective of God's Word, I would argue something else. There is a spirit underneath the claims of feminists that rears its head again and again. The same spirit that led Eve to overcome her husband, led Jezebel to dominate Ahab, and that wreaks gender havoc on society today whenever it is unleashed by our foolish pretensions for equality and our rejection of God's good and preserving boundaries. But perhaps I will uncharacteristically leave the last words to journalists who observed Sarah Bernhardt in her day. Quote, in 1890, one of the writers for the newspaper L'Eclair stated that she descends in a curvy line from the serpent who corrupted Eve. The critic Jules Lemaitre saw her as a distant chimerical creature, sacred and serpentine, with a fascination both mystic and sensual. A 1908 article, fittingly enough for a satanic female figure of titanic stature, made her out to be a female counterpart to Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch. What is even more incredible is that today, this woman doesn't even stand out in a crowd. To both believers and unbelievers. Think of some of the marches we've seen in Washington. And remember when Trump was in office and the women were wearing all the, the hats and stuff. We don't need to. But think of that. This character, so counterculture in her day, today would be tame. Women today in general are more like Sarah than Mary. We need far more Marys and far less Sarahs. So this article is part of his series on satanic feminism, which we'll be checking into and be giving you some more of this as we move on into these topics. So we've come to the end of our topic for today. I have quite a lot here, though, to share with you about biblical foundations for manhood and womanhood. There's a link that I can give you, and I think Summer has access to it right now as well. If I can find it. There we go. Wayne Grudem. Wayne Grudem. This book is available freely on the internet. This is Biblical Foundations for Manhood and Womanhood. This is a good source, folks. And it's available here for you to read if you like. It's freely available in PDF form right here. I've got the link for you. And also there is this, Suffering is Not for Nothing. I can remember what I did with that. From Ligonier Ministries, also freely available out there on the interwebs. There you go. Now this is Elizabeth Elliot examining the terrible realities of tragedy and loss and considers how we can reconcile them with the truth of God's sovereignty and love. She lost 2 husbands. I think both of them were pastors. I know the first one was a missionary. And she gives an inspiring message here. You can see here. You can listen to it here. Free for you. Can we remind you, folks, while we're at this point, to please subscribe to our backup channel, True Normal TV on YouTube. You can go to truenormal.tv and it'll take you right to our YouTube channel. I'll show you what that looks like right now. If you just type in True Normal.tv in your web browser, voila, there you go. It takes you right to True Normal TV, which is our backup YouTube channel. Featuring right now Surprise Outbreak. Some of you may have seen this already, but there you go.
Well, we talked to a lot of people.
We don't want to see Matt again. How did Matt get up there on our channel? There we go.
These sacred truths are self-evident. The proper study of apes is apes. But certain young cynics have chosen to study man. Yes, perverted scientists who advance an insidious theory called evolution.
So there you go. You can check out some of that on our alternate YouTube channel. Please visit armoroftruth.net. Okay, and check out our Culture Vault. Summer has got several new articles up here. Unmasking Satan's Motive. This is from G3 Ministries. Scroll down and check out the Culture Vault, which is right there. You can see it. All right, and we're working on getting you some. In the AOT Live Raw link at the top, we're going to be. You'll see here we've got an example of one of our shows, Agenda 2052, A Chinese New World Order, where you can just click on this and you can see all of our show notes, the notes for the show that day. It's everything. I hardly take anything out of here, but it's just the show that I'm looking at as I'm bringing it to you. You can see all of our links. You can check all that out. Please note, our newsletter has gone out. So if you're signed up for our newsletter, be on the lookout for you. It should be there for you now. It went out already last week, or earlier this week. It might be in your spam folder. You need to look at it. Go to your spam folder and check to see if you've got something from armoroftruth.net in there. Bring it back to your inbox. Mark it as not spam. Help us to get our message out by sharing our YouTube channel, Armor of Truth. And also, True Normal TV is our backup channel. Share our social links and our newsletter with your community. We depend on you to help push this message forward against the algorithms. We can only do it with your help. And if you'd like a free Bible, email us at hello@armoroftruth.net for a free Bible and a starter pack of tracts. hello@armoroftruth.net. And make sure you give us your mailing address, and we will send you a Bible and a starter pack of tracts. They're right over here. And we ask you, we thank you for your patience as we get through the church finders. We have a lot of people on that list. We sent out a couple more this week. So, and when you go visit these churches, please report back to us and let us know what you find. And check out the Wayne Grudem link we've got for you there, the Biblical Foundations for Manhood and Womanhood, and Elizabeth Elliot's lecture. It's a small book as well, but you can watch the lecture here for free. Where's God in Our Suffering? Yeah, the shack. We're going to share a little bit of that with you, but we'll get to that in our next show. So as we leave you today, we want to cover very quickly here. Leave you with something useful. A lot of interesting stuff, but not really uplifting as we understand where our culture's headed, and now we can see exactly what the source of that, what's caused that. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 through 32. Let's start with verse 1. It's Paul writing from prison, writing a letter that is more like an encyclical meant for more churches than just at Ephesus. Paul says, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. This is for Christians. This is for believers. Walk worthy to the calling, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace with fellow believers. There's one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Now that's sovereignty. One God who is Father of all, over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. I'm saying he ascended. What does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower regions of the earth? He was here with us. He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, That is what ministry is for building up the body of Christ. Until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by fancy reasoning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. Now there's headship again. Grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. That is the church, folks. That is the body of Christ. It has to be together. We are members one of another. We can't be free agents. We have to be with one another to do our work in this world. Verse 17, now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as you used to, in the futility of your mind, as the Gentiles do. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. That's our world. That's what we're in the middle of. Verse 20 says, but that is not the way you learned Christ. Assuming that you have heard about Him and were taught in Him, as the truth is in Jesus. Now, verse 22, here's where we're focused. Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt. Put off the corruption. Put off deceitful desires. And just like Romans 12:2, here in verse 23 it says, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds. To have a new heart, a new way. So you put off the old self. Put off the old habits. Put off the old behaviors. And put on the new self. What is the new self? The new self is what's patterned after God. And how do we know where to find that pattern? It's right here in the Scriptures. Put off the old self. Put off the corruption, the old manner of life. Be renewed in the spirit of your minds. And put on the new self, which is created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor. For we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Don't hold grudges, not even with what you see happening in the world, the people who seem to be driving us right over the cliff. You can't hold grudges and be angry at those people. They are people, image bearers of God, who need to hear the gospel too. They might reject it, but still. Be angry and do not sin. And don't hold a grudge. And give no opportunity to the devil. That's telling you right there, how can you give opportunity to the devil? By holding grudges, by letting anger linger. Verse 28, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, let him work, let him do honest work with his own hands so that he may have something to share when someone else is in need. So you put off the old self and put on Christ, which is to serve. You stop taking in the new life, like a thief. You stop taking from the world. In the new self, you do good works for Christ so that you can share in all of that with others. Verse 29, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. It's a tough one, isn't it? Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. It just doesn't only mean foul language. It means lies. It means deceptions, bad attitudes, but only such as is good for building up. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only say that's good for building up, as it fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness be put away from you, along with all malice, all evil intent. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. And be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. That is why we forgive. Not because it is easy to forgive, not because it always feels like the right thing to do, because sometimes it doesn't feel like the right thing to do, but we forgive one another because Christ forgave everything evil and wicked about you. Put off the old self. Put on the new self.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.